Imagine waking before the sun has even touched the horizon. The castle is still wrapped in darkness, the stone walls cold, the air damp with the scent of ash from last night's fires. You do not wake because you are rested. You wake because you must. This is not your home. This is your place of duty. Today, like every day, you are a servant in a wealthy medieval household. In a wealthy medieval household, servants formed the unseen foundation upon which all comfort, order, and prestige depended. The grand halls, glittering feasts, and carefully managed estates that modern imagination associates with the Middle Ages did not function by noble will alone. They functioned because of labor, constant, structured, and human. To understand what it meant to be a servant was to understand the rhythm of the entire household, because every noble action, every ceremony, every display of wealth was supported by individuals whose lives revolved around duty rather than privilege. Most servants did not enter service by choice in the way modern employment is understood. For many, service was simply the next step in a life shaped by circumstance. A child born to a farming family might be sent to a manor at a young age because there were too many mouths to feed at home. Another might be placed into service as part of an agreement between families or as a way to secure training, protection, or opportunity. In some cases, entire generations served the same household, creating a continuity that tied families to estates for decades or even centuries. Service was not always seen as a fall from independence. Often, it was viewed as a practical necessity in a world where survival itself required attachment to land, lordship, or institution. A large medieval household could resemble a small village contained within walls. There were dozens of roles to fill, and each role required reliability more than recognition. Servants were expected to function like parts of a machine, predictable, disciplined, and tireless. The success of the household depended not only on strength or skill, but on coordination. One person's delay could ripple outward, disrupting meals, travel plans, or ceremonies. This interdependence meant that even the lowest-ranking servant contributed to the visible success of the highest-ranking noble. Many servants began their lives of duty as children. Young boys and girls might be taken into service between the ages of 7 and 10, entering an environment that demanded maturity far earlier than modern childhood allows. These children learned quickly how to carry messages, fetch water, observe etiquette, and remain silent unless addressed. They were trained not only in tasks, but in behavior, how to bow, how to stand aside, how to anticipate needs before they were spoken. Their education was practical, rooted in repetition rather than books, and shaped by the belief that usefulness defined worth. The backgrounds of servants varied widely. Some came from peasant families seeking economic security, while others were the orphaned or displaced, absorbed into households that required steady labor. A few entered service through recommendation, their families leveraging connections to secure better positions. While noble birth determined rank at the top of society, among servants reputation became the currency of advancement. A hard-working individual known for loyalty could gain trust and responsibility, while one careless mistake could follow a servant for years, limiting opportunities elsewhere. Daily life in service demanded both physical endurance and emotional restraint. Servants were required to be present yet unobtrusive, attentive yet silent. They moved constantly through spaces designed to display wealth, but rarely to accommodate those maintaining it. The polished floors they scrubbed were not meant for them to linger upon. The roaring fires they built were meant to warm others. Their labor was meant to disappear into the background, leaving behind only the illusion of effortless comfort. Clothing itself reflected status within service. Higher-ranking servants might receive garments made from durable but respectable fabrics, while lower-ranking workers wore simple wool or linen designed for utility rather than appearance. These distinctions were not merely aesthetic. They reinforced hierarchy and helped maintain order. One glance could reveal a servant's place within the structure, reminding everyone of the invisible ladder that governed their interactions. Food, too, illustrated both the privileges and limits of service. Servants were fed regularly, often better than rural laborers who struggled through famine or harsh winters. Yet they ate different food from their masters, usually simpler fare such as coarse bread, pottage, and small portions of meat when available. Meals were taken quickly, sometimes in shared rooms or kitchens, because time spent eating was time not spent working. The abundance they prepared for others rarely translated into indulgence for themselves. Service also offered a form of protection in an unpredictable world. Outside the walls of a wealthy estate, life could be precarious. Harvest failures, disease, or conflict could devastate entire communities. Within a large household, however, servants were part of an organized system that stored food, enforced rules, and provided a degree of stability. This security came at the cost of personal freedom, but for many, it was a trade considered worthwhile. Loyalty was one of the most valued qualities in a servant. Households depended on trust, particularly because servants handled valuable goods, private chambers, and sensitive information. A dishonest worker threatened not only property, but reputation. As a result, long-serving individuals often became deeply woven into the life of the household, recognized by name, entrusted with responsibility, and relied upon during times of difficulty. Their loyalty was expected to be unwavering, and in return, some masters provided protection, gifts, or continued employment into old age. Yet service could also be harsh and unforgiving. Expectations were relentless, and personal desires held little weight against obligation. A servant's schedule was dictated entirely by the needs of others. There was little opportunity to choose when to rest, where to go, or how to spend time. Even relationships and friendships were shaped by duty, as servants often worked long hours in close proximity but under constant supervision. Despite these challenges, service was not devoid of human connection or pride. Many servants took satisfaction in competence, the ability to perform tasks efficiently, to manage complex routines, or to contribute to a smoothly functioning household. Skills learned in service could be extensive: cooking for large numbers, maintaining equipment, organizing supplies, caring for animals, or managing logistics. Such knowledge had practical value and could sometimes lead to improved positions or transfers to other estates. The structure of service also reinforced the broader social order of the medieval world. Just as nobles governed lands and knights provided defense, servants ensured the continuity of domestic life. Each role, however humble, was seen as part of a divinely ordered hierarchy in which everyone had a place. This worldview encouraged acceptance of one's position, framing duty as both necessity and virtue. Over time, servants became the custodians of tradition within households. They remembered how festivals were prepared, how rooms were arranged for important guests, how seasonal routines unfolded. When younger members of noble families grew up, it was often servants who had quietly overseen their daily care, dressing them, feeding them, guiding them through childhood routines. In this sense, servants shaped not only the physical environment, but the lived experiences of those they served. To be a servant, therefore, was to inhabit a life defined by constancy. The work repeated day after day, season after season, forming a rhythm that structured existence itself. While nobles might travel, negotiate alliances, or wage wars, servants maintained continuity at home. Their world was measured not in grand events but in completed tasks: a floor cleaned, a fire lit, a meal prepared on time. Even though their names rarely appeared in written records, servants were indispensable participants in medieval society. Without them, the elaborate households celebrated in chronicles and legends could not have functioned. Their labor sustained not only comfort but authority, transforming wealth into lived reality. The shining surface of aristocratic life was, in truth, supported by countless ordinary individuals whose dedication allowed that brilliance to exist at all. In understanding their experiences, one begins to see medieval households not simply as places of privilege, but as complex communities of work, discipline, and interdependence. Places where the lives of servants, though often unrecorded, were essential threads in the fabric of the age. In a wealthy medieval household, order was not accidental. It was constructed carefully through a strict hierarchy that governed every movement, responsibility, and interaction within the estate. Such households could include dozens, sometimes even hundreds of people, and without a clear structure, chaos would have threatened the smooth running of daily life. The hierarchy ensured that every person knew whom they answered to, what they were responsible for, and how their labor contributed to the greater functioning of the household. At the center of this structure stood the lord or lady, whose authority shaped the rhythm of the entire establishment. Yet they rarely involved themselves in practical matters. Instead, authority flowed downward through layers of trusted officials who translated noble expectations into daily action. These individuals acted as managers, supervisors, and enforcers, ensuring that instructions were carried out precisely. The household was, in effect, an administrative body as much as a domestic one, with systems resembling governance rather than simple employment. The most important of these officials was typically the chief administrator of the household, a figure entrusted with overseeing finances, supplies, discipline, and coordination. This role required not only loyalty, but intelligence and organizational skill. Managing a large estate meant tracking food stores, supervising workers, arranging repairs, and preparing for visitors, all while ensuring that resources were neither wasted nor stolen. Written accounts, tallies, and inventories were sometimes kept to maintain oversight, demonstrating that even in an age often imagined as informal, careful record-keeping played a vital role. Below this upper level existed a network of specialized supervisors, each responsible for a particular domain. The household was divided into functional areas such as kitchens, storage rooms, sleeping quarters, stables, workshops, and outdoor lands. Each area demanded expertise. Those overseeing food preparation had to understand quantities, preservation methods, and seasonal availability. Those in charge of clothing and furnishings managed valuable textiles that symbolized wealth. Stable supervisors ensured that horses, essential for travel and status, were maintained in excellent condition. This division of labor created a chain of command. Orders moved downward from supervisors to ordinary servants, while information moved upward in the form of reports, requests, or warnings. Communication had to be efficient because delays could disrupt carefully timed routines. For example, a late delivery of firewood could leave rooms cold, while a miscount of provisions might cause embarrassment during a banquet. Every role depended on the accuracy and reliability of others. Hierarchy was reinforced not only through responsibility but also through visibility. Higher-ranking servants often wore better clothing, carried keys or tools symbolizing authority, and had access to spaces forbidden to others. Keys, in particular, represented trust. Storerooms, wine cellars, and valuable chests were locked, and only certain individuals were permitted to open them. Possession of a key signified both responsibility and status, marking the bearer as someone who stood closer to the confidence of the household's rulers. Lower-ranking servants, by contrast, performed the most physically demanding work. They scrubbed, carried, cleaned, hauled, and maintained. Their tasks required endurance more than decision-making, yet they were still bound by the same expectations of discipline. They could not abandon their duties or alter routines without permission. Even small deviations could create confusion within such a tightly managed environment. Training played a crucial role in maintaining this order. New servants did not simply arrive and begin working, they learned by observing those above them. Instructions were passed down through demonstration and repetition rather than formal schooling. A young worker might spend months assisting an experienced servant, gradually absorbing knowledge about timing, tools, and expectations. This apprenticeship-like system ensured continuity, allowing practices to remain consistent across generations. The hierarchy also governed movement within the household's physical spaces. Grand halls, private chambers, service corridors, kitchens, and storage areas were not shared equally. Servants used specific entrances and passageways designed to keep their work out of sight. This separation preserved the illusion that noble life unfolded effortlessly, untouched by the labor sustaining it. The architecture itself reflected hierarchy, with hidden staircases, back halls, and workrooms forming an invisible network behind the more splendid public spaces. Etiquette reinforced these boundaries. Servants were required to show deference not only to nobles, but also to those ranked above them. Forms of address, posture, and behavior were regulated carefully. A lower servant might bow or step aside when encountering a superior, acknowledging their authority through gesture alone. These rituals maintained clarity, preventing disputes about status that might otherwise disrupt cooperation. Discipline was another essential component of hierarchical life. Large households depended on reliability, and failure to meet expectations could not be ignored. Supervisors monitored attendance, work quality, and conduct, addressing problems quickly to maintain order. While punishments varied, they were intended less as cruelty and more as correction, reinforcing the seriousness of responsibility. A household that allowed negligence risked undermining its own reputation. Gender also influenced roles within the hierarchy. While both men and women served in wealthy households, their duties were often divided along practical lines shaped by social expectations. Women frequently worked in areas connected to textiles, cleaning, and personal attendance, while men might handle outdoor labor, heavy transport, or animal care. However, this division was not absolute. Necessity often overrode convention, and adaptability was valued. Time itself was organized according to hierarchical needs. Bells, routines, or verbal commands structured the day, ensuring that different departments worked in harmony. Food preparation had to align with serving schedules. Cleaning had to occur before important gatherings, and supplies had to be moved without interfering with ceremonies or rest periods. The synchronization of these efforts reflected a collective discipline shaped by leadership. The hierarchy extended beyond labor into social relationships among servants themselves. Friendships, rivalries, and alliances developed, often influenced by rank. Those closer to authority might wield informal influence, while those at the bottom depended on cooperation to endure difficult tasks. These interactions formed a secondary social world within the household, one defined not by noble lineage but by shared work and proximity. Advancement within this system, though limited, was possible. A diligent worker could earn promotion to positions involving oversight or specialized skills. Such advancement brought modest privileges, better lodging, increased pay, or reduced physical strain, but it also carried greater responsibility. Success depended heavily on reputation. Trustworthiness, efficiency, and discretion were qualities noticed by superiors and rewarded when opportunities arose. The hierarchical structure also ensured continuity during times of change. When a noble family traveled, married, or inherited new lands, the established order allowed the household to adapt quickly. Experienced officials coordinated transitions, ensuring that routines resumed without disruption. This stability contributed to the perception of noble households as enduring institutions rather than temporary residences. Ceremonial occasions revealed the hierarchy most clearly. During feasts or visits from important guests, every servant had a defined place and sequence of action. Food was presented in a specific order, rooms prepared according to custom, and movements choreographed with precision. Such events demonstrated not only wealth but control, the ability to command many individuals to act as one coordinated body. Even in quieter moments, the hierarchy never disappeared. It shaped where people stood, how they spoke, and what they were allowed to know. Information itself was often restricted. Decisions made at the top were not always explained to those below. This separation preserved authority, ensuring that leadership remained unquestioned, while practical tasks continued uninterrupted. Ultimately, the strict organization of a wealthy medieval household was essential to its survival. Without hierarchy, the scale of its operations would have been unmanageable. Food supplies might spoil, resources might vanish, and disputes might fracture cooperation. Instead, the layered structure transformed a collection of individuals into a functioning institution, capable of sustaining both daily routines and extraordinary events. Through this system, servants became participants in a carefully balanced order that defined medieval domestic life. Each role, whether supervisory or humble, contributed to a network of responsibility that allowed the household to operate smoothly. The hierarchy did more than assign work. It created a framework of authority, discipline, and interdependence that shaped every aspect of existence within those walls. The day for a servant in a wealthy medieval household did not begin with sunrise, but long before it. In a world without mechanical alarms or electric light, time was measured by habit, bells, and the expectations of those in authority. Servants rose in darkness, often guided by little more than the faint glow of embers left from the previous night's fires. The silence of early morning was not peaceful. It was filled with urgency. There was much to accomplish before the household's masters stirred, and every moment mattered. The first task was usually the rekindling of heat. Stone buildings retained cold, especially during the long winters of medieval Europe. Without attention, fireplaces would die, leaving rooms damp and inhospitable. Servants moved from chamber to chamber carrying kindling, blowing gently on coals to coax flames back to life. This work required patience and skill, as fires had to be revived without filling rooms with smoke. A well-tended fire meant comfort later. A poorly lit one could delay the entire household's routine. Fetching water followed closely behind. Water was essential for cooking, washing, and countless other needs, yet it did not flow conveniently from taps. Servants carried heavy buckets from wells, springs, or storage cisterns, sometimes walking significant distances. This repetitive labor demanded strength and balance, especially in cold weather when surfaces could be slippery. Each trip was necessary, and dozens might be required before the day truly began. Cleaning was another early priority. Floors, often made of stone or packed earth, collected dirt quickly. Servants swept using bundles of reeds or scrubbed surfaces with sand and water. Tables and benches were wiped down, ashes removed from hearths, and waste carried outside. These actions prepared the environment so that when members of the noble family awoke, they encountered order rather than the remnants of yesterday's activity. The preparation of clothing and personal items also began at this hour. Garments had to be laid out, brushed, or warmed near the fire. In an age when fabrics were expensive and often delicate, careful handling was essential. Servants responsible for such tasks learned to recognize each item's place and owner, ensuring nothing was misplaced. The smooth beginning of a noble's day depended on these quiet acts of organization. Meanwhile, activity intensified in the kitchens. Even before dawn, cooks and their assistants began assembling ingredients for the first meal. Grain might be ground, bread sliced, or broth reheated. Fires had to be kept at steady temperatures, requiring constant attention. The smell of smoke and food gradually filled the air, signaling that the household was coming to life even if its masters remained asleep. The coordination of these tasks required awareness rather than direct communication. Servants rarely gathered to discuss plans. Instead, they understood their roles through routine. Each person anticipated what others would need. Those lighting fires worked quickly so that kitchen workers could begin sooner. Those carrying water ensured supplies were ready for washing or cooking. This unspoken cooperation reflected the discipline ingrained in household life. As morning approached, additional responsibilities emerged. Doors and shutters were opened to admit light. Fresh rushes might be laid on floors, and tools prepared for the day's labor. In households with animals, stable workers began feeding and grooming horses, cleaning stalls, and preparing equipment for possible travel. The estate's outdoor spaces required as much attention as its interior, and these tasks often began under the pale light of dawn. For many servants, breakfast was brief and practical. They ate quickly, often standing or sitting in shared areas, consuming simple foods meant to sustain rather than satisfy. There was little time for rest. The demands of the day continued to unfold, and meals for servants themselves were fitted into narrow intervals between duties. As the household's masters awoke, the pace shifted but did not slow. Servants transitioned from preparation to attendance. Water for washing was delivered, clothing adjusted, and rooms tidied again if necessary. Every action had to be completed efficiently, as delays could be interpreted as incompetence. The earlier hours of work were invisible to those they served, yet they made possible the appearance of effortless order. Throughout the morning, cleaning continued in cycles. Areas already used needed attention again, and new spaces required preparation for upcoming activities. Windows were checked, bedding aired, and waste removed. Without modern sanitation, maintaining cleanliness demanded constant vigilance. Servants understood that neglect could lead not only to discomfort but to illness, making their labor vital for health as well as appearance. The rhythm of the day was shaped by repetition. Tasks were rarely performed once, they were revisited as needed. Fires were replenished, water replaced, and tools returned to their places. This pattern created a continuous flow of motion, with servants rarely standing idle. Even moments of waiting were opportunities to prepare for the next responsibility. Seasonal changes influenced these routines. In winter, darkness lasted longer, and servants worked many hours by candlelight. Extra fuel had to be gathered and distributed, adding to the burden. In summer, earlier dawns meant even earlier starts, as daylight extended the time available for labor. Weather could complicate everything, from carrying water through mud to maintaining fires in damp conditions. The psychological demands of such mornings were as real as the physical ones. Rising daily before sunrise required discipline and resilience. Fatigue accumulated, yet expectations did not change. Servants adapted by internalizing their schedules so completely that waking early became second nature. The predictability of routine helped them endure even when the work was exhausting. Despite the hardship, these early hours also fostered a sense of shared experience among servants. Those who labored together before the household awoke developed quiet camaraderie. They depended on each other's reliability and often learned to coordinate without speaking. This cooperation allowed them to manage workloads that would have been overwhelming individually. The morning period revealed how deeply medieval households relied on preparation. Comfort was never spontaneous, it was constructed through effort. Every warm room, clean garment, or ready meal represented hours of unseen labor. Servants became specialists in anticipation, solving problems before they were noticed. As the sun finally rose and illuminated the estate, much of the hardest work had already been completed. Yet for servants the day was far from over. What appeared to be a beginning was, in truth, only the continuation of a cycle that had started in darkness and would extend well into the evening. These early routines defined the nature of service itself. They demonstrated that a servant's role was not limited to isolated tasks but encompassed the creation of an environment in which others could live comfortably. Their labor bridged night and day, transforming cold, silent spaces into active, functioning households. Understanding these mornings provides insight into the broader structure of medieval life. Time was organized around necessity rather than convenience, and those in service bore the responsibility of aligning the household with that rhythm. Their work demanded strength, punctuality, and unwavering attention, shaping days that began long before the visible world had stirred. Through such disciplined beginnings, servants ensured that the household operated smoothly from the moment its masters awoke. The quiet, methodical labor performed before sunrise laid the foundation for everything that followed, making the early hours the hidden cornerstone of daily life in a wealthy medieval home. Once the early morning preparations were complete and the household had awakened, the focus of labor shifted toward the many tasks required to sustain daily life across the estate. Work did not concentrate in a single place, but spread throughout kitchens, workshops, storerooms, gardens, courtyards, and surrounding lands. Each area demanded attention, and each servant contributed to a network of activity that kept the household functioning hour by hour. The kitchen quickly became the busiest center of operations. Preparing food for a wealthy household was not a simple matter of cooking a few dishes. Meals required planning, coordination, and physical effort on a large scale. Fires had to be maintained continuously, and large quantities of ingredients handled at once. Grain might be milled into flour, vegetables cleaned and chopped, herbs prepared, and meat inspected and portioned. Cooking vessels were heavy, often made of iron or copper, and moving them safely demanded strength and experience. Heat defined the kitchen environment. Open flames, smoke, and the constant motion of people created an atmosphere that was exhausting even in colder months. Servants worked in close quarters, carrying pots, stirring stews, and ensuring nothing burned. Recipes, though rarely written down in precise form, were preserved through memory and instruction. Experienced workers guided younger ones, teaching them how to judge temperature, timing, and flavor by observation rather than measurement. Beyond cooking itself, the kitchen required continual cleaning and organization. Ashes had to be removed, tools washed, surfaces scrubbed, and supplies arranged for future use. Without such maintenance, disorder could quickly take hold, interrupting the flow of work. The process of preparing food generated as much labor afterward as it did during preparation, and servants moved seamlessly between these stages. Outside the kitchen, activity extended into storage areas where provisions were managed. Wealthy households often kept large quantities of food preserved through salting, drying, or pickling to ensure availability throughout the year. Servants monitored these supplies carefully, checking for spoilage, pests, or shortages. Proper storage was essential, particularly during seasons when fresh produce was scarce. This responsibility required vigilance, as a single oversight could waste valuable resources. Gardens and orchards formed another important sphere of work. Servants tended vegetables, herbs, and fruit trees that supplemented the household's diet. These spaces demanded regular watering, weeding, and harvesting, all timed according to the seasons. Knowledge of planting cycles and soil care was passed down through practice, allowing households to remain partly self-sufficient. The produce gathered each day moved quickly from garden to kitchen, linking outdoor labor directly with indoor preparation. In the stables, a different rhythm prevailed. Horses were essential for transportation, communication, and status, and their care required constant attention. Servants fed them, cleaned their stalls, groomed their coats, and inspected equipment such as saddles and harnesses. These tasks were physically demanding and often messy, yet they ensured that animals remained healthy and ready for use at any moment. Travel plans or unexpected journeys could arise suddenly, and readiness was part of daily responsibility. Maintenance work also filled much of the day. Buildings constructed of wood and stone required frequent repair. Servants patched roofs, reinforced doors, mended fences, and carried materials for larger projects. Tools were sharpened, carts repaired, and pathways cleared. This ongoing upkeep prevented small problems from becoming serious threats to the household's safety or efficiency. Textile work represented another layer of labor, often carried out in quieter spaces Clothing and linens wore out quickly under constant use, so servants spent hours washing, drying, and mending fabrics. Laundry involved hauling water, heating it over fires, scrubbing garments, and hanging them to dry in open air. Once cleaned, items might be stitched, patched, or adjusted to extend their usefulness. These repetitive tasks demanded patience and attention to detail. Throughout the estate, movement never ceased. Servants carried messages, delivered supplies, and transported finished work from one area to another. This constant circulation allowed different parts of the household to remain connected. Communication was practical and immediate, relying on direct instruction rather than written orders. A well-functioning household depended on these swift exchanges. Seasonal changes influenced the nature of this labor. During harvest periods, additional effort went into gathering crops and storing them for future use. In colder months, fuel had to be collected and distributed, increasing the workload associated with heating. Spring demanded repairs after winter damage, while summer required attention to preservation and preparation for the coming year. Each season reshaped daily responsibilities without reducing their intensity. Large events or gatherings added further complexity. When guests were expected, servants intensified their efforts to prepare spaces, arrange furnishings, and produce elaborate meals. Such occasions required coordination across all departments, transforming ordinary routines into carefully managed operations. Though these events might appear festive, they represented significant labor behind the scenes. Even routine tasks required awareness of hierarchy and discipline. Servants reported progress to supervisors, received new instructions, and adjusted their activities as needed. Efficiency was valued, but so was order. Tools had to be returned, spaces left organized, and duties performed according to established standards. The repetition of these practices created consistency, ensuring that each day's work built upon the last. Despite the demanding nature of this labor, it fostered practical expertise. Servants became skilled in multiple areas, from handling animals to preserving food or repairing materials. This versatility allowed households to adapt to unexpected challenges, whether shortages, weather changes, or sudden demands from their masters. Experience was often the most valuable teacher, shaping capable workers through years of practice. The physical toll of such work was undeniable. Hours of lifting, carrying, and standing strained the body, and rest periods were limited. Yet servants learned to pace themselves, balancing endurance with efficiency. Shared responsibilities sometimes eased the burden, as workers cooperated to complete heavy or time-sensitive tasks. As the day progressed, earlier efforts blended into ongoing cycles of preparation and maintenance. Meals led to cleaning, repairs led to further adjustments, and outdoor work fed back into indoor needs. There was rarely a clear endpoint to any task. Instead, servants moved from one responsibility to another, sustaining the household through continuous effort. This interconnected web of activity revealed how deeply medieval life relied on manual labor. Without modern machinery or conveniences, every necessity, from food to shelter, required direct human involvement. Servants were the agents through whom these needs were met, translating resources into usable form through persistence and coordination. By the time afternoon approached, much had already been accomplished, yet the day's work remained far from finished. The estate still required supervision, preparation for evening meals, and countless smaller duties that ensured nothing fell into neglect. Each completed task supported the next, forming an unbroken chain of labor that defined service within a wealthy medieval household. Through this sustained effort, servants maintained not only the material needs of their environment, but also the appearance of stability and order valued by those they served. Their work transformed raw resources into comfort, demonstrating that the grandeur associated with medieval wealth depended entirely on the dedication and endurance of those whose labor filled every hour of the day. Life within a wealthy medieval household was governed not only by work but by rules, clear, firm, and constantly reinforced. These rules shaped behavior, speech, movement, and even thought, creating an environment where discipline was considered essential to maintaining order. Servants did not simply perform tasks, they lived within a system that demanded obedience, reliability, and respect at every moment of the day. From the time a servant entered the household, expectations were explained through example and correction. Proper conduct was learned by watching others and repeating what they did. A servant was expected to stand attentively, listen carefully, and respond immediately to instructions. Hesitation could be interpreted as reluctance, and reluctance could be seen as disobedience. In a setting where efficiency mattered, such behavior was corrected quickly. Speech itself was regulated. Servants were not meant to speak freely in the presence of their superiors. Conversations with nobles were brief and purposeful, limited to answering questions or acknowledging commands. Even among themselves, servants were expected to remain focused on their duties rather than engage in excessive talk. Silence, or at least restraint, was considered a sign of discipline and respect. Movement throughout the household followed similar principles. Servants walked quickly but carefully, avoiding unnecessary noise or disruption. Running was discouraged unless urgency demanded it, while lingering suggested idleness. They were trained to anticipate needs, positioning themselves where they might be required without drawing attention. This careful balance, being present but unobtrusive, defined much of their daily existence. Appearance also mattered. Though servants did not wear luxurious clothing, they were expected to remain neat and orderly. Clean garments, tied hair, and practical dress reflected the dignity of the household itself. A careless appearance could suggest neglect, and neglect, in turn, might reflect poorly on those in charge. Even modest clothing carried symbolic weight, reinforcing the idea that every member of the household contributed to its reputation. Discipline was not maintained solely through instruction, it relied on accountability. Supervisors observed how tasks were performed, noting whether they were completed thoroughly and on time. A servant who consistently worked well might earn trust, while one who failed to meet expectations could face reprimands or reassignment. The goal was not only to correct mistakes, but to ensure that standards remained consistent across the entire household. Living arrangements reinforced this structured life. Servants usually shared sleeping spaces, often simple rooms furnished with straw mattresses or wooden frames. Privacy was limited, and personal belongings were few. These shared quarters encouraged practicality rather than comfort, reflecting the belief that service was a collective effort rather than an individual pursuit. Meals followed a similar pattern of simplicity. Servants ate together, usually after their duties allowed time, consuming food designed to sustain rather than indulge. Bread, porridge, vegetables, and occasional meat formed the basis of their diet. Eating quickly and returning to work was common, as extended leisure was rare. Yet these shared meals provided moments of companionship, offering brief respite from the demands of labor. Despite the strict environment, service did offer certain forms of stability. Within the household walls, servants were assured regular meals and shelter, protections not always guaranteed in the broader medieval world. For individuals who might otherwise struggle to survive independently, this arrangement provided security, even if it came at the cost of personal freedom. Rules extended beyond daily routines into moral expectations. Loyalty was highly valued, and servants were expected to act in ways that upheld the household's honor. Gossip, theft, or carelessness could damage trust and disrupt harmony. Because servants often handled valuable objects or witnessed private matters, discretion was essential. Maintaining confidentiality became as important as completing physical tasks. Punishments for breaking rules varied, but were intended to reinforce discipline rather than simply inflict hardship. A warning might be followed by additional duties, loss of privileges, or, in more serious cases, dismissal. Losing one's position could be devastating, as employment was closely tied to survival. This reality encouraged most servants to adhere closely to expectations. Relationships among servants developed within this structured environment. Cooperation was necessary, as many tasks required teamwork. Workers learned to rely on one another's punctuality and skill, forming bonds shaped by shared responsibilities. At the same time, awareness of rank remained, influencing how individuals interacted. Respect for those with greater authority was expected even among the serving class. Time for rest was limited but valued. When evening approached and duties began to lessen, servants might gather briefly to talk, repair clothing, or prepare for the next day. These quiet moments offered a sense of normalcy within an otherwise demanding schedule. However, they remained aware that their availability might still be required if new instructions arrived. Religious observance also played a role in daily life. Many households observed regular prayers or attended services, and servants often participated as part of the community. These occasions provided structure and reflection, reinforcing shared beliefs about duty, humility, and order. Faith, like discipline, was intertwined with the rhythm of service. The environment in which servants lived demanded resilience. Physical exhaustion combined with constant oversight could be challenging, yet many adapted by developing routines that allowed them to endure. Familiarity with tasks reduced uncertainty, and the predictability of expectations created a form of stability within the strict framework. Even small privileges could carry significance. A trusted servant might receive slightly better lodging, more responsibility, or the chance to learn specialized skills. These distinctions, though modest, offered recognition and motivation. Advancement was not guaranteed, but it remained possible through consistent effort and reliability. Daily life in such households revealed how closely work and identity were connected. Servants were defined largely by what they did and how well they did it. Their contributions were rarely celebrated publicly, yet they were essential to maintaining the order that nobles relied upon. Through discipline and adherence to rules, they ensured that the household functioned smoothly. The structure surrounding them might appear rigid, but it allowed large numbers of people to live and work together effectively. Without clear expectations, confusion and conflict could easily arise. The rules provided clarity, assigning each person a place within the larger system and guiding behavior toward shared goals. Over time, servants internalized these expectations so deeply that they became second nature. Actions were performed almost automatically, shaped by habit rather than conscious thought. This adaptation allowed them to navigate demanding schedules while maintaining the efficiency required of them. Thus, life as a servant was not defined solely by labor, but by the discipline that framed it. Every gesture, movement, and decision reflected the order of the household. Within this environment, individuals balanced obligation with endurance, contributing to a system that depended on their consistency and dedication. In this way, the rules and daily realities of service formed an essential foundation for the functioning of wealthy medieval households. They created a structured community where each person, regardless of rank, played a part in sustaining the rhythm of life behind the grand appearances seen by the outside world. For many who lived and worked within a wealthy medieval household, service was not merely a temporary condition, but a way of life that could last for years, sometimes for an entire lifetime. While the daily routines were demanding and the rules strict, service also created opportunities, limited yet meaningful, for stability, skill, and occasionally advancement. Within this structured environment, loyalty and perseverance could shape a person's future in ways that were rarely available outside the walls of such an estate. A servant who proved dependable became more than just a worker. They became part of the household's functioning memory. Experience mattered greatly. Someone who understood the rhythms of the estate, the preferences of its masters, and the organization of its supplies was invaluable. Over time, these individuals were trusted with greater responsibility, whether supervising younger workers, managing particular tasks, or safeguarding valuable goods. Advancement did not happen quickly, but it was possible through years of consistent effort. Skill played an important role in determining opportunity. Some servants developed specialized knowledge, preparing complex meals, maintaining clothing, caring for animals, or organizing provisions. These abilities distinguished them from those performing only general labor. A household relied heavily on individuals who could perform tasks well without constant supervision, and such competence often brought modest privileges. Better living conditions, increased authority, or more stable assignments might follow. Service also provided a form of informal education. Though many servants could not read or write, they gained practical knowledge through observation and repetition. They learned how to manage time, handle resources carefully, and adapt to changing circumstances. These lessons were not taught in classrooms, but through daily necessity. A servant might come to understand preservation methods, building maintenance, or the coordination required for large gatherings, acquiring expertise that could be carried into later life. Loyalty was deeply valued and often reciprocated. Long-serving individuals sometimes formed enduring relationships with the families they served. They might witness births, marriages, and other milestones, becoming familiar figures within the household's private world. In return, masters occasionally rewarded faithful service with gifts, continued employment during illness or old age, or assistance in securing positions for relatives. Such gestures reinforced the bond between service and trust. Yet this closeness did not erase the boundaries of hierarchy. Servants remained aware of their position even when they were treated kindly. Their role was to support, not to share in authority. Respectful distance was maintained, ensuring that order remained intact. The balance between familiarity and formality defined many long-term relationships within the household. As years passed, servants often became witnesses to history in quiet, personal ways. They observed political alliances discussed over meals, celebrations marking important events, and the ordinary moments that shaped daily life. Though rarely recorded in official accounts, their presence allowed them to see how decisions affected both the household and the surrounding community. In this sense, they were silent participants in a broader social narrative. For some, service became a pathway to modest independence. A trusted servant might save small wages or receive items of value over time, allowing them to establish a household of their own later in life. Others transitioned into roles that required oversight rather than physical labor, enabling them to continue working as age limited their strength. These gradual changes reflected how service could evolve rather than end abruptly. The sense of belonging within a household could also be significant. Servants worked alongside the same people day after day, sharing responsibilities and experiences that fostered familiarity. This environment created a community defined not by equality, but by shared purpose. Cooperation was essential, and over time it formed bonds shaped by necessity as much as companionship. Even so, the life of service remained demanding. Advancement brought new responsibilities rather than freedom, and long hours never disappeared entirely. Aging servants often continued contributing in whatever ways they could, adapting tasks to their abilities. The expectation of usefulness persisted, reflecting a culture in which work was closely tied to identity and worth. Religion and tradition offered frameworks that helped individuals interpret their roles. Many believed that fulfilling one's duties faithfully was part of a larger moral order. This perspective encouraged patience and perseverance, framing service not merely as obligation, but as participation in a structured society. Whether motivated by faith, necessity, or habit, servants often understood their lives within this broader context. The passing of knowledge from experienced servants to new arrivals ensured continuity. Older workers instructed younger ones, demonstrating techniques, explaining routines, and reinforcing expectations. This mentorship preserved the household's functioning across generations, allowing customs and practices to endure even as individual members changed. Occasionally, moments of celebration or recognition broke the routine. Festivals, holidays, or successful events might bring shared meals or small rewards. These occasions did not erase hierarchy, but they provided acknowledgement of collective effort. They reminded servants that their labor contributed to occasions of joy as well as daily survival. As time moved forward, the lives of servants remained intertwined with the households they supported. Their work maintained buildings, sustained traditions, and ensured that wealth translated into lived comfort. Without their constant attention, the structures of noble life would have faltered. Their presence was so fundamental that it often went unnoticed, becoming part of the expected order of things. Looking back, the experience of service reveals a life defined by endurance, adaptation, and contribution. Though rarely celebrated in chronicles or remembered by name, servants played a crucial role in shaping the functioning of medieval society. Their labor connected resources to results, transforming land and goods into the lived reality of household life. Through loyalty and sustained effort, many found not only survival but a measure of stability and purpose. Their world was structured, demanding, and often unyielding, yet it allowed them to participate in a system larger than themselves. In fulfilling their duties, they ensured that the rhythms of medieval life continued uninterrupted, day after day, year after year. Thus, the life of a servant in a wealthy medieval household was one of quiet persistence. It required strength, discipline, and adaptability, but it also offered continuity in an uncertain era. Their contributions formed the hidden framework supporting the visible grandeur of the age, reminding us that behind every display of wealth stood countless individuals whose work made such displays possible. Life as a servant in a wealthy medieval household extended far beyond mere work. While duties, hierarchy, and rules defined their daily existence, the human experience beneath the labor was rich, complex, and often overlooked in historical accounts. Servants lived in a world where the line between necessity and endurance blurred, where personal ambitions were tempered by duty, and where small joys were treasured precisely because life was structured around obligation rather than freedom. Understanding this dimension of service reveals not only the practical aspects of medieval households but also the emotional, social, and psychological realities that shaped those who lived in the shadow of wealth. For many, entering service was a transformative experience. Children and adolescents, often sent from rural villages or born into families with generations of domestic workers, found themselves suddenly immersed in a large, organized household. The adjustment could be overwhelming. Sheer scale of the estate, the strict routines, and the constant presence of authority required rapid adaptation. Young servants learned quickly that their worth would be measured by utility and reliability rather than personal preference. Mistakes were corrected, sometimes harshly, and success was rarely recognized beyond the expectations of duty fulfilled. Over time, however, many found a rhythm that allowed them to navigate the household efficiently, internalizing its routines and hierarchies until they became second nature. Despite the demanding nature of their roles, servants developed a keen sense of awareness and observation. Life in a large estate was intricate, with multiple tasks occurring simultaneously. To succeed, a servant had to notice subtleties, the subtle expressions of the household's masters, the state of a fire or meal, the placement of furniture, and the timing of daily events. Anticipation became a skill honed over years, as workers learned to act before a command was given, to prepare before need arose. This ability to read the environment, to foresee potential issues, and to adapt on the fly was essential for survival and for the smooth operation of the household. In this way, servants developed a form of intelligence that was practical, social, and deeply intuitive, yet rarely recorded in formal histories. The emotional dimension of service was layered. On one hand, there was satisfaction in competence and mastery. A well-polished floor, a perfectly cooked meal, or a clean and organized chamber provided tangible proof of skill. The knowledge that a noble household could operate efficiently because of one's work created a sense of pride. Yet, this pride was often quiet, private, and unacknowledged by those who benefited from it. Servants understood that their contributions were necessary but invisible. Their labor was meant to be seamless, leaving no evidence of the effort behind comfort. The invisibility of service fostered resilience and humility but could also lead to feelings of invisibility and isolation. Social relationships among servants formed an important part of this world. Within the strict hierarchy, individuals found companionship and support among peers. Shared labor, especially physically demanding or tedious tasks, created bonds of camaraderie. Workers exchanged advice, warned each other of potential pitfalls, and sometimes shared small comforts such as food or clothing. These relationships provided emotional sustenance in a life otherwise dominated by rules and obligation. Yet even here, hierarchy and competition played a role. A higher-ranking servant might have authority over a peer or mentor younger individuals, creating dynamics that mixed cooperation with rivalry. Navigating these relationships required tact, adaptability, and an understanding of social nuance. The household itself was a microcosm of society. Servants witnessed the interactions of the nobility, their negotiations, disputes, celebrations, and sorrows. They saw the private behaviors that outsiders never did, the quarrels over inheritance, the tensions in arranged marriages, the pleasures and indulgences of leisure, and the pressures of maintaining appearances. In this sense, servants became living observers of power, social dynamics, and human behavior. Their perspective was unique, intimate, informed, yet marginalized, providing them with knowledge that carried practical importance even if it could not alter their status. Moments of human vulnerability emerged even in strict routines. Illness, injury, or fatigue challenged the expectation of tireless labor. Servants had to adapt, either by taking smaller tasks, seeking discreet assistance, or enduring discomfort while maintaining appearances. Senior household members sometimes provided help, whether through small allowances, reassignment of duties, or compassionate gestures, but often endurance was expected above all. These moments shaped character, fostering patience, resilience, and ingenuity in dealing with the limitations of the human body within the demands of service. Life in service was also shaped by transient joys and celebrations. Religious festivals, seasonal events, or special gatherings provided brief relief from routine. During these occasions, servants might enjoy slightly better food, receive small gifts, or participate in communal observances. While these moments did not erase the structure or rigor of daily life, they offered symbolic rewards and a sense of connection to the broader social and spiritual rhythms of the era. For young servants, these occasions might also serve as education, showing how labor and preparation contributed to public display, ritual, and ceremony. The personal lives of servants were often constrained by their duties but not entirely absent. Friendships, courtships, and familial responsibilities had to be balanced against the demands of the household. Marriages among servants were possible, but timing, permissions, and responsibilities influenced choices. Families were sometimes accommodated within the estate, particularly for senior or trusted workers, but privacy was limited. Children of servants were often apprenticed early, continuing cycles of service that intertwined personal ambition with the expectations of labor. In this way, the household shaped not only work, but the intimate contours of life. Adaptability was crucial to survival and long-term well-being. The needs of the household could change suddenly. A feast might be scheduled unexpectedly, a noble might fall ill, or a guest could arrive early. Servants had to adjust swiftly, reorganizing labor, reallocating resources, and maintaining calm under pressure. Those who excelled at flexibility gained trust and responsibility, while those who struggled risked reprimand or dismissal. The ability to navigate these unpredictable moments became a measure of both competence and personal resilience. Emotional intelligence, in particular, was a skill cultivated over years. Servants needed to interpret moods, anticipate preferences, and communicate nonverbally with both superiors and peers. Understanding subtle cues, tone of voice, body language, or timing allowed them to avoid errors and maintain harmony. This ability to read the room was as valuable as physical skill or technical knowledge. Many long-serving individuals became unofficial advisors within their areas of responsibility, providing guidance quietly to prevent conflict or inefficiency. The perception of time in a servant's life differed markedly from that of their masters. While nobles experienced time in terms of leisure, ceremony, and external events, servants measured it in cycles of labor and preparation. Each day followed patterns of rising, working, cleaning, cooking, and maintaining. The constancy of these rhythms provided predictability, yet also emphasized the relentless pace of service. Even when visible activity slowed, tasks remained, requiring vigilance and anticipation. The temporal experience of a servant was one of continuity, punctuated occasionally by celebrations or urgent demands, but defined largely by repetition and diligence. Despite the strict boundaries, servants sometimes found avenues for personal growth and accomplishment. A trusted individual might be given responsibility over particular domains, such as the pantry, the stables, or specific rooms. Success in these areas brought recognition within the household, improved working conditions, and a sense of agency. They might develop expertise in managing resources, understanding culinary techniques, or coordinating schedules. These skills provided both immediate rewards and long-term value, allowing a servant to maintain employability or gain leverage within the network of estates in the region. The moral framework of the era also shaped servant experience. Medieval society emphasized duty, obedience, and humility. Many viewed faithful service as a form of moral or spiritual responsibility. Performing work diligently, maintaining loyalty, and exercising discretion were not only practical requirements, but moral obligations. This perspective helped servants find purpose in their labor, framing service as participation in a structured, ordered world where personal effort upheld social and ethical norms. Servants were also repositories of household memory. Over decades, they observed evolving routines, changes in leadership, and generational transitions. They remembered practices, preferences, and procedures that allowed the estate to function even as individuals came and went. In some cases, their continuity provided stability during periods of upheaval, whether due to succession, illness, or external conflict. Though seldom acknowledged, their institutional knowledge was invaluable. The risks of service were real. Mistakes could lead to punishment, loss of position, or social embarrassment. Physical danger was present in managing fires, carrying heavy objects, or working with animals. Yet within this framework, many developed resilience, ingenuity, and practical problem-solving skills. The challenges of service honed both physical and mental faculties, producing individuals capable of navigating complex, high-pressure environments. In their own small ways, servants could influence household life. Trusted individuals, particularly those in supervisory roles, made decisions about the organization of work, the allocation of resources, and the preparation of events. While ultimate authority rested with the nobility, these small interventions shaped efficiency, comfort, and even morale. Over time, experienced servants acquired a degree of autonomy, exercising judgment and discretion within defined boundaries. The emotional landscape of service was thus a complex interplay of constraint and agency, discipline and recognition, invisibility and influence. Servants were at once essential and peripheral, responsible for the smooth functioning of the household while remaining largely unseen. Their labor was both a source of pride and a measure of endurance, shaping identity through the rhythms of obligation, adaptation, and human connection. Finally, service could provide a sense of belonging. Despite hierarchical constraints, individuals shared daily life, work, challenges, and small victories. Communities formed among peers, shaped by cooperation, mentorship, and shared experience. Even when opportunities for personal freedom were limited, the household became a space where individuals navigated social, emotional, and practical realities together. In this way, life as a servant was not merely about survival or labor. It was a social, human experience that connected individuals to one another and to the broader structure of medieval society. In examining these dimensions, it becomes clear that servants were more than tools of the household. They were living participants in its operation, culture, and memory. Their lives embodied endurance, skill, adaptability, and quiet wisdom. Through their labor and vigilance, they transformed raw resources into comfort, order, and spectacle. Though their names rarely appear in the annals of history, their presence defined the very possibility of wealth, stability, and grandeur in the medieval household. The unseen human experience of service, the emotional resilience, social skill, and daily labor, was the foundation upon which the medieval world rested, a reminder that every society, no matter how noble, depends upon those who labor faithfully behind the scenes. So next time you imagine the Middle Ages, don't just picture the lords and ladies. Picture the hands that lit the fires before dawn, the feet that hurried through stone corridors, the lives spent in service, quiet, disciplined, and unforgettable, because without them there would have been no great households at all.